In the previous lecture, we discussed about the new input types that have been introduced in HTML5. We also, along the way, discovered some of the new input attributes that have been introduced in HTML5, for instance, max, min, step. Now, in this lecture, we'll take a look at the new HTML form attributes that have been introduced in HTML5. The first one that we will be taking a look at is the autocomplete attribute. Now, this specifies whether a form or input field should have autocomplete on or off. When autocomplete is on, the browser automatically completes the input values based on the values that the user has entered before. Now, this attribute works with form as well as input types such as text, search, URL, telephone, email, password, date pickers, range, and color. And here we are making use of this with the input type email. The next that we have is no validate attribute. No validate is used with the form tag, so here we are making use of it. And whenever it's present, it specifies that the form data should not be validated when it's submitted. Next we have autofocus. This attribute specifies that the input field should automatically get focus when the page loads. So you might have seen this example when you are doing a Google Gmail login. So there, when you load the form, it automatically highlights the email field. So you just start typing your email address over there. So it just makes it convenient for the user. The next attribute that we have is a very special one, and I personally like it, and that is form attribute. Now, the form attribute can be used to associate a given input or more than one input fields to a form. So over here you can see that we have a form whose ID is FRM user, and this form is getting closed over here, and we have the first name input outside the form declaration. Using the form attribute, I can simply specify its ID, FRM user, and that will make this particular input type as part of the form itself. So even though it's not inside the form declaration, it is part of the same form. Next in line is the form action attribute. This specifies the URL of a file that will process the input control when the form is submitted. The form action attribute overrides the action attribute of the form element tag. So here you can see that by default we have this submit button, which when clicked will take the user to this particular page, somepage.php. But for some reason, if you want to change the action, you can do that now using the form action attribute with the button itself, and here you can specify that page name. Next we have form inc type. So usually we define this form inc type along with the form declaration on top, but if you want to override it with some conditional submit options, you can do that now by having this attribute in the input tag. So form inc type equals multipart form data, and that is going to submit the data as multipart form data. Then we have form method attribute. Now, form method attribute actually overrides the method attribute that we specify in the form. So if I say over here method as get, at the bottom I can say form method as post. So this attribute will override the form method defined in the form declaration, and this attribute can be used with input type submit as well as image. Similarly, we have form no validate, and this attribute overrides the no validate attribute of the form element, and this can only be used with the submit type. Next we have form target attribute, and this attribute overrides the target attribute of the form element, and it can be used with the type submit and type image. This also specifies a name or keyword that indicates where to display the response. that is received after submitting the form. Next, we have a very special attribute called list. Now here you can see that I have specified input list equal to browsers, and then I'm making use of this data list with these options, browsers name coming in, and whenever I'll be making use of this input, I can simply type in and it will give me an autocomplete kind of feature. So let me show you this one. So here you can see that it's coming in as a drop down where you can select all these options. You can also type in to just filter out the one that you require. So matching one will also be appearing over here. You can see that no matter whether it's starting with the typed character or it's containing that typed character, it will show you the result. So that's one benefit of using the data list attribute. And then we have the multiple attribute for image. Now this attribute specifies that the user is allowed to enter more than one value in the input element. This also works with email and file. So you can have it for emails as well as for uploading images, as we have demonstrated over here. Next we have the placeholder attribute. Now the placeholder attribute specifies a hint that describes the expected value of an input field. For instance, over here we are expecting first name from the user, so we have made it as first name. And the placeholder attribute works with text, search, URL, telephone, email, and password. In the next lecture, we'll be taking a look at form validation in detail.